And we have 2 lectures left this afternoon, so there's still plenty of fun to happen. Right now, we're going to be talking about toxic foods, which obviously does not include answers. And so I want to introduce our next speaker, who is Dr. Katie Kangas. She owns and operates Integrative Veterinary Care, a private practice in San Diego, California, offering holistic and integrative healthcare options for pets. Dr. Kangas achieved her CVA, which is a certification in veterinary acupuncture, at the Chi Institute in 2008, followed by additional training in advanced acupuncture, food therapy, herbal medicine, veterinary orthopedic manipulation, or VOM. Her areas of special interest include nutrition, functional medicine, dental health, and pain management. Dr. Kangas has authored several articles published in veterinary journals and pet magazines, and shares her passion for pet wellness education by lecturing and presenting locally, nationally, and internationally. Additionally, Dr. Kangas has a background in shelter medicine with more than 15 years of contribution to the homeless pets in her community. She spent many years working with the San Diego County Department of Animal Services and also served as the medical director of the San Diego Humane Society and SPCA from 2002 to 2007. With that, I would like to bring you Dr. Katie Kangas.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And I would love to add here that it is such an honor for me to speak after Dr. Keith Weingart, because many people may not know that Keith was in San Diego prior to where he is now in Portland. And Keith happens to be my mentor and a large inspiration in my life and in my work. And I was at the Humane Society back in 2005 when I met Keith for my very own dog, Asti. And then I started working with Keith in 2008. And so I've been doing holistic over a decade, and I have a deep appreciation for Dr. Weingart. So it is really fun to follow up after his talk. So
very good, very appropriate. And you can go ahead and share your screen anytime you're ready.
Will do. All right, play from start. Okay, so we're looking good, Doug? All right. Okay, then I will take it away. So our topic that I am presenting, I'm very passionate about, and I've actually presented quite a bit on this in the last few years, and I did 2 hours of this for the AHVMA, the American Holistic Veterinary Medical Association, last year. So I've condensed 2 hours into 1 hour to give you all the highlights, and this is going to be some things that are so aligned with what we're talking about with food medicine, and the fact that Answers is hosting is very well aligned with the topic that I'm presenting, and this is such great information, so I'm very eager to share it with you guys. So the title of my presentation, as you can see, how this toxic era of industrial farming is affecting both animals and people. Okay. And glyphosate is a biggie, so we'll talk about that a lot, but there's a lot of other toxins too. Doug gave me a great introduction, so just a little picture to see me in my practice, see a little subtitles there about all the modalities that I use on a regular basis. My passion is nutrition. I start with food. My prescription list, literally on my go-home sheet for my patients, starts with food. I have developed into a functional medicine mindset. Even though I was acupuncture trained, Chinese medicine trained, that was certainly my pathway into holistic medicine. I've really sort of evolved into the niche of focusing kind of primarily on functional medicine, but using all the other things too under the umbrella of holistic. And you see all these modalities that I employ in my practice. And then just a couple of fun photos for some more connection with me and my best friend, my doggy Sage. And we, of course, as you know, are in San Diego, and what a great place to be, a great venue for what I do in my work, but also a great place to stay grounded and happy and be out in nature. And so we spend a lot of time at the beach, getting our feet in the sand. So as I mentioned, I really like to focus on functional medicine. And as with all of the holistic approaches, within the umbrella of holistic medicine, functional medicine is looking at and aiming to address the root causes of the imbalance. But the way I see it, or the way I apply it, is that functional medicine really has 2 main principles that it boils down to. And the first principle is giving the body the best tools to function optimally. And of course, the best tools always start with food. Now you can branch that out into herbal medicine and homeopathy and other great tools, but food medicine is where it starts for the body. And that's something, of course, that I incorporate a lot. The second principle of functional medicine is, what can we do to minimize or avoid or remove as many offenders that are challenging the body with inflammation and chronic disease, okay? And so building the body up, minimizing and removing as many things that are tearing it down and challenging it. And so we know that chronic inflammation is really at the source of all, or that inflammation is at the source of all chronic disease, okay? So in a really, nutshell, when I look at my patients, one of the things that I'm always thinking about is, how do I decrease inflammation in their body? Because if we can help their body to get rid of some inflammation, we get to help everything. And one of the easiest ways to decrease inflammation, what I tell my new clients all the time, is get your pet off processed food. Right away, poof, inflammation in the body is going to fall. But toxins are big offenders too, okay? So that's why I started getting so passionate about toxins, is because it's that number 2 on my list of functional medicine. So building up and learning what to avoid and how we can do better about doing that. So most people, you think of toxins, you right away think of challenges to the liver and kidneys. Indeed, there's a lot of things going on though with toxins in the body, but I just want to run through some good stuff to preface everything here. So fun pictures here of liver being challenged all the time. Every herbalist will say you can always make a case to support the liver, okay? And I'm sure Dr. Keith talked quite a bit about that too. Kidneys as well, one of the other major, clearance organs in the body, or detox organs. So these guys are getting challenged all the time, especially in today's world. And as you'll see in this presentation, a lot more for pets even than for humans. And we're facing more than we want to as well. But our pets are really facing a high toxic burden. So the other thing that toxins are challenging is the immune system. And most people know that the immune system is very associated with, well, everything. But pets with allergies, huge, huge issue. Autoimmune disease, rampant IBD. These things are all associated with immune function, and toxins are challenging that too. And then we can't be in a holistic mindset and not talk about the gut. Everything starts there. And so toxins are challenging, and glyphosate is a biggie, and we're going to hear about that today. Toxins are challenging the gut lining big time, okay? And anybody who really knows holistic medicine, or if you've been working with a holistic vet, or if this is the first time you're hearing it, leaky gut syndrome is literally the cornerstone of where a lot of inflammation is coming from in the body. So we're always looking to see what we can do to help the gut. And anytime the gut is compromised, the microbiome is compromised. And the microbiome gets compromised from other reasons too, processed foods and overuse of antibiotics and so on and so forth. But leaky gut is a biggie in offending the microbiome as well. So as I mentioned, this is a big deal for our pets because they face a much higher toxic burden in today's world even than we do. And there's a lot of toxins in our society today. So for pets, so many toxins in their daily living. We're very familiar with the overuse of insecticides, flea products, deworming meds. These pets are getting chemicals put in their body on a very regular basis, much more than most humans. And then they have a lot more topical exposure than we do. So, some of the flea meds are topical, but a lot of things that they're getting are oral every month, but then they're just out in the grass, in the environment, getting in contact with more things than us. They don't wear shoes, of course. They roll around in the grass. They're sniffing up everything. They're getting a lot of nasal, and sinus contamination compared to people as well. Then we have the issue, I'm big on toxins, so these all go in the same category. So I'm just going to preface a nice little, intro to all this. But vaccines, again, excessive vaccines, we're moving more away from that. Obviously, any holistic veterinarian is plugged into that, but thankfully, more and more conventional veterinarians are paying better attention to this as well. And not only are vaccines challenging the immune system when they're done excessively, but they also contain adjuvants, which are toxic. So mercury and aluminum and all these other things. So again, more things that are building up in the body of these pets with all this exposure. Then we have EMF toxicity, electromagnetic field. I've written about this. I've presented on this as well. Falls into the toxin category. It's an invisible toxin, but it is challenging all of us. And now we've got 5G. We're surrounded by devices. Now with the pandemic, we're all working at home. We're really surrounded from our devices all the time. And our pets are too, especially if you're working from home. So anyway, another toxin that's challenging everybody, and we do our best to mitigate that. And that's a whole nother talk. So then let's look at some of the biggest things that we're going to actually focus on today, of course, in this discussion is water and food. that are bringing high levels of toxins into our pets' bodies, okay? And most people are probably familiar with, no matter where you are, tap water, not good. There are hundreds of contaminants in tap water, not just the kind of chemicals and toxins we may think of readily, but also hormones and, you know, antibiotics and all kinds of stuff. So I always encourage my clients to feed or to offer purified water to their pets rather than tap water, okay? And then we're gonna get to the topic of food, which is all about what we're talking about today and why they are so toxic, why they have become so toxic. And glyphosate is a biggie. And so that's a big focus of our talk, but you know, lots of carcinogens, preservatives, and things in these processed foods. And it's gonna make you so glad that you don't feed that. And anybody who still does will not want to anymore. So I will kind of move forward through this by telling you that one of my inspirations to start teaching about this and writing about it and exploring toxins in our pets more is my good fortune actually of meeting Dr. Zach Bush. And this would have been probably, if I wrote this in 2019, it would have been 2018 that I met Zach. If you are not familiar with Dr. Zach Bush yet, I highly recommend you follow him. He is an incredible speaker, an incredible teacher. He's a leading authority on microbiome, soil science, glyphosate, toxins, planetary health, soil health, and whole body health, okay? So I met Dr. Zach right after the whole FDA thing came out about dilated cardiomyopathy with grain-free foods, okay? So I was looking into how I could add some good shed some good light on that because it was being so misrepresented. And I met Dr. Zach and I'm like, hey, what's your take on this whole, why are lentils toxic all of a sudden and what's going on? And now we have this, you know, DCM issue with dogs. And so he really broke down a lot of information for me so that I could start to present this and teach everybody else. So anyway, this is one of my favorite articles that I've ever written. It's very brief, it's 3 pages. If you haven't seen it, you may want to. And it's just as good for information for people as it is for pets. In that article, I go through basically all these topics and tie them all together. So we got, why are foods so toxic? We got processed foods, heavily processed foods with heat, create a lot of issues. Then, you know, we get leaky gut syndrome going on, the microbiome gets disrupted. Then there's this whole interesting issue with lectins, you know, and then being toxic, the plant paradox. Dr. Gundry, if people have heard of him, started talking about how lentils are toxic. Interestingly, before I wrote that article for Dogs Naturally that I just showed you, Toxic Foods, the edition of that magazine prior, Billy Hoekman had written an article about anti-nutrients. So it was a perfect lead-in, and I actually referred back to Billy's article in one of the sections of my article too. So it ties all this in together. And then, oh, by the way, there's a ton of glyphosate being sprayed all over everything. So this is largely impacting this whole scenario and sure looks apparent to be involved with the DCM issue and the cardiac issue for dogs. And so we're going to get to that in the presentation as well. Okay, so let's move forward and talk just real briefly. Most of our group here today probably is pretty familiar with why foods are toxic through the processing. We're just gonna run through it and then tie that into other things. I'm gonna steal a phrase from Dr. Zach, which I love, is that we have gotten in our society, we have gotten to a point where we are eating bizarre chemical states of food. And the average American human is probably really only eating 40% food in their intake. 60% of it, you could literally say, are chemicals. And for the average dog and cat, hopefully nobody in our audience today, but the average dog and cat, nothing. I mean, they're probably lucky if they're eating anything but chemicals, okay? So we know that food is being very challenged by the way it's, you know, or the health of food is being very challenged by the way that it's processed. We've got refined oils now we want to stay away from, the vegetable oils, the canola oils, all that junk. We've got high heat destroying the foods, and that's how most of, you know, that's what most pet foods are, of course, traditionally. But here's the next thing that we're going to really dive into today is how are these foods grown and what is happening in the level of the soil and with the growth of these foods before they even make it to the point that they're processed. So most people are very familiar that the processing thing's an issue, but I think less people are familiar with the fact of what the heck is happening to these foods before they even get to the point where they're heavily processed. And it's just as big as an issue. So this is a very common, you know, picture, I'm sure, for everybody, but just to display it, you got the yucky extrusion process in this left side picture, high heat, high pressure, creating this kibble, and then obviously a far cry from what our pets were designed to eat. And that food on the right looks very, very great. And again, the heavy processing, the high heat, not only is killing nutrients, but it's creating pro-inflammatory mediators. And that's why I educate my clients. As soon as you drop or get processed food out of your pet's life, inflammation will drop, because there's pro-inflammatory things in these processed foods for you too, obviously. And there's carcinogens. You know, a lot of these pro-inflammatory mediators are proven carcinogens as well. Then on top of that, you have toxic preservatives added into these foods for, you know, shelf life and stability and all that kind of stuff. And so then you're adding more toxins and more carcinogens. And ethoxyquin, by the way, is one that's in fish-based kibble. And that is a big problem. And so many people think that fish or salmon is better for their dogs or more hypoallergenic, and they'll put them on a fish-based kibble and leave them on it for years. And they are getting heavy. And this is the other thing I can add in here is, just because toxins are measured below like a bad level in one meal, they have cumulative effects. So when these pets are eating these foods for years on end, big toxic load. Okay, so quick review, impact of diet choices. Of course, heavily processed foods not only are more pro-inflammatory, but they tend to have higher carb content, which is also pro-inflammatory. Most people know carbohydrates metabolize into sugars in the body, and sugars drive inflammation. Sugars drive increase of insulin each time, and that's associated with inflammation. High carb foods, not really good for anybody, but certainly not good for carnivores and for our pets. Then on the flip side, we've got raw or low processed foods, definitely anti-inflammatory. And these are the kinds of foods that typically have low levels of carbohydrates, if any, maybe for some of the foods. Okay, so big, big difference. But now we're going to move forward into, how are these foods grown? What is happening to these foods before they even get to the point where they're processed? And I know Billy would be happy with this statement too. He talks about the dirt all over the eggs at the farms and, you know, all this cool stuff. And literally, soil health is where all planetary health starts. I mean, we can only be as healthy as a planet and as a body as the soil that our food comes from, okay? And of course, it all goes down the line. Our pets are feeding on animals that rely on, I mean, we all rely on the soil. So enough said. Big issue that is challenging our soil and our planet is glyphosates. And for those of you who don't know yet, glyphosate is the name of the main ingredient, the herbicide that is in Roundup, which is Monsanto's patented product, okay? But now there are more than 750 different products with glyphosate in them as soon as the patent was lifted, okay? So it is rampant. Unfortunately, glyphosate is not just an herbicide, it's an antibiotic. We're gonna look at that too. And then just to, you know, bring it into, you know, some more association, is that GMOs, which most people are familiar with that acronym at this point, GMO, genetically modified organism, is where these were crops that were genetically engineered to be resistant to Roundup, because farmers said, okay, great, here's this great herbicide, but if we spray it on our crops to kill the weeds, it's going to kill the crop. And so what's the point? So big business and science were like, we got a good idea for that. We're going to genetically engineer plants, which maybe sounded brilliant at first glance by somebody, but we clearly know that that is not a good idea, and that's creating a lot of problems. So GMO already is a big issue, but we're spraying glyphosate all over everything, which is equally a big issue, okay? So let me review 3 major things that glyphosate is doing, okay, or how it's being used. One of them is that it's, and the most recognized, is that it's an herbicide, and that's why it was developed. It's inhibiting plant enzymes, which unfortunately is making the food less nutritious too, by the way. But it's inhibiting enzymes in the plant to stop the plant growth for the weeds and things like that. It's also used, which most people I'm sure don't know, as a regulator for plant growth to quickly ripen the crops at the end of season so that farmers can increase their yield, okay? So they use it to desiccate the crops, even non-GMO crops, you're gonna see that. Thirdly, and very unfortunately, glyphosate is an antibiotic, and it was actually patented as an antibiotic years after the initial patents. It is interfering with the soil microbes, which means it's interfering with everybody's body on the planet too, and it's a huge factor in the growing antibiotic resistance across the globe. So I know Doug, Dr. Doug, and Billy, and everybody who's listening is, if you don't know this already, this is going to tug at your heart, because most of us want our food to be our medicine. That's what's appropriate. That's our, you know, that's our mantra. And with glyphosate, your food can't be your medicine anymore. And what we now see is that glyphosate, because this herbicide is blocking nutrients in the plants, the nutrients that are that a lot of the nutrients that are medicinal to the body are alkaloids, and glyphosate is specifically blocking them. So not only is it a toxin and causing all kinds of issues in that way, but it's actually making our food less nutritious, which is a darn shame. And they've shown that a lot of neurotransmitters that are very important for the brain are, these alkaloids are critically important. You have all kinds of kids growing up now with autism and ADD and ADHD and animals with anxiety and, all this kind of stuff. And granted, there's a lot of factors going on there, but these neurotransmitters that the brain needs to stay calm and stay balanced are not being created in these foods that people are eating anymore, and that dog people are eating too. And farm animal people as well, okay? So they're a lot less nutritious for our dogs that are eating them, unless your pet's eating answers, and then they're very nutritious because they're not eating this crap. Okay, so let's look at glyphosate as a desiccant for growth regulating, because this is really important fact that you'll see as we unfold here in the next few slides. So GMO crops, as I mentioned, were indeed engineered to be tolerant to Roundup, which makes sense. So those plants are sprayed early in the growing season, and these would be the very familiar corn and soy, okay? They're sprayed in the beginning because they can withstand the Roundup, it'll kill the weeds, corn and soy will survive. They're gonna have moderate levels of glyphosate by the time they're eaten, okay? But interestingly, non-GMO crops, okay? Most people think non-GMO foods are healthier. Non-GMO crops can still be sprayed with glyphosate, and unfortunately they're sprayed at the end of harvest because otherwise it would kill the crop. So they're sprayed right before harvest to hasten the ripening, to dry it up, to get it ready for the farmers to yield it. And lo and behold, these plants have the highest levels of glyphosates. And guess what they are? Oats, wheat, legumes, lentils, peas, and beans are included in legumes. You'll probably recognize those are big time ingredients in a lot of pet foods, okay? So big take home point from this discussion today is, does non-GMO mean that it's healthier or cleaner? Absolutely not. So organic and non-GMO are not synonymous, okay? So that is something that's really important for you to know. Don't get lulled into a false sense of security if you see the non-GMO label on a food. And I hate to pick on Cheerios. No, I don't. I'm gonna pick on Cheerios because they're oats. And sorry to say that unless oats are organic, 100% of them are contaminated with glyphosate, okay? So that is a big deal. Is non-GMO does not necessarily mean that it's clean or it's healthy, and it certainly doesn't mean organic. So the highest glyphosate foods, as you can see, other than wheat, everything on this list is in high percentages in grain-free foods for pets, okay? So that's gonna come into play in our discussion, and you'll understand a little bit more about this. How do we know that those levels are so high? How do we know that glyphosate is at such high levels in these foods? Well, fortunately for organizations such as Health Research Institute or HRI Labs, Larry Bolin is the founder of HRI, and I had the pleasure, he was also a big inspiration, met Dr. Zach Bush. Shortly later, the universe put us together. I met Larry Bolin. Amazing, because he heads this lab, nonprofit lab, that their mission is to help protect food systems that nourish people and animals, support farmers, protect the environment, and sustain the soil to grow good food. So they have been testing without a bias because they're nonprofit, so that was a big deal for them. They've been testing foods, and they're testing animal urine and all this kind of stuff. So luckily, Larry and I have been able to present together in the past, and he shared some slides with me so I can really inform you with great information that Larry provided to me. His lab, HRI, has measured lots of pet foods, okay? And we're gonna talk about, I'm sure you can't read these, but I'm gonna break it down for you in another slide and let you know that levels in the standard pet foods in the market, dry and canned, crazy high, okay, of glyphosate. I love this slide from Larry, so I wanted to share it because it really helps you remember which foods are tremendously high in glyphosate. He calls them the owl foods: the oats, the wheats, and the legumes. And remember that legumes include chickpeas, lentils, beans, peas, okay? There's a lot of pea protein in pet foods now, and pea starch and pea. And if you didn't know, they're splitting labels too now. So you get pea protein, pea starch, pea flour, all this stuff. And so it rises meat, by the way, when you're looking at a food bag and you're reading the ingredients, Meat could be listed at the top, so you think it's the most volume plentiful in the bag or in the product. But because they're splitting, they're label splitting, now pea protein and pea starch can be different. And so even though peas will outweigh the meat, they can actually show up farther down on the label, which is really terrible. But anyway, all these foods are these owl foods. And remember, they're the highest, whereas the medium levels of glyphosate are the traditional GMO, corn and soy that we're aware of. And so just remember, non-GMO and natural on a label don't mean anything as far as toxins and glyphosate. Thanks to Larry and HRI, we also know the levels of glyphosate in animal urine, okay? And they've done farm animals too, but this displays humans are the little tiny level at the left, and we still have too much. Cats are next. Cats' levels of glyphosate in their urine on average is 16 times higher than humans. Dogs, 32 times higher. Horses, right behind dogs at 29 times higher than humans, okay? We're gonna talk about why. So this is an article not from HRI. I mean, I think Larry provided this for me, but this was not their study. This was a study that appeared in a human medical journal that showed that the average American human, our levels of glyphosate in our urine increased by 38-fold in 20 years. And that study was done between 1995 and 2015. So I shudder to think in the last 6 years, I mean, it's exponential. So clearly we have more now than we did in 2015, but that's already scary. And so then I'm going to remind you and bring you back to, okay, we talked about how glyphosate is used as an herbicide. We talked about it regulating plant growth so that these plants sprayed at the end of harvest are especially toxic. But now let's talk a little bit about its use as an antibiotic and what's that is doing to the soil microbes and everybody's microbiome after that too. So unfortunately, glyphosate is so ubiquitously used across the planet. And the other thing is, and there are places in Europe, by the way, that don't spray with glyphosate and things like that, but glyphosate is a water-soluble toxin, which is such a shame because it's getting everywhere. It's going up in the condensation, it's coming back down the rain. They're measuring glyphosate in rainfall. They also measure it a lot in the Mississippi River Basin. It's dumping out, you know, from all of our farmland from the United States. And this is one of the things I presented. I'm going to stick it in here, even though I don't have a slide, that the water is collecting all of that glyphosate when it comes out of the Mississippi River Basin and dumps into the Gulf near New Orleans. Human medical researchers actually call New Orleans Cancer Alley. And it is said that people who live in the New Orleans area have the highest rates of cancer in the entire developed world, okay? And that is the highest level of glyphosate. Don't think it's a coincidence, but just saying. Okay, so I'm gonna back. So glyphosate is unfortunately the most widely used antibiotic in the world. It's definitely adding to resistance. They've done studies to show that when glyphosate is sprayed on things, bacteria get far greater resistance, okay? Its impact on the microbiome is gonna be tremendous. We all know when the microbiome is challenged, we get dysbiosis, which is an imbalance of the beneficial or the bacteria in the gut. Things that our pets very commonly get, IBD, people oftentimes diagnosed with SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Leaky gut is huge. As I mentioned, autoimmune diseases, big time, so many. They're climbing in every species for our pets, for ourselves. And then this whole gut-brain axis. So everybody's suffering from brain issues. And I actually wrote an article for Animal Wellness magazine last year where there's been studies out of Washington and Oregon actually that have shown that microbiome dysbiosis and imbalance in the microbiome is actually causing issues with dog aggression. So dog aggression and anxiety has been studied in relation to what's going on in the microbiome. Okay, so we know about this gut-brain axis. We've now proven, of course, that that affects our dogs too. So if it wasn't bad enough that glyphosate is directly affecting the microbiome because it's an antibiotic, it's also directly affecting the gut. And then when you get leaky gut, it's breaking down the gut barrier. We're going to see that in a second. You get leaky gut, that further disrupts the microbiome. So now you got two reasons why the microbiome is being disrupted, but importantly, the gut is being disrupted, and that's a huge issue all the way around. So we know with immune disruption, chronic inflammation in the gut, autoimmune disease, brain health gets challenged, everything. So here's some nice pictures to get a quick view of what is happening in a situation where the gut lining is being challenged or destroyed. Unfortunately, glyphosate destroys basically the mucosal membrane surfaces throughout the body. Okay, so the gut and GI tract notably is getting compromised. The kidney tubules and the urinary tract are also getting compromised, and the nasal sinuses. People have so many allergies now, and hay fever. Dogs, of course, it's a big deal. They're sniffing and all this kind of stuff. It's compromising all of that. It is disrupting the tight cellular junctions. Glyphosate and other toxins, it's not the only toxin, but it's been well studied, is disrupting the intelligent barrier that the gut has to keep things out of circulation, absorbing what's supposed to be absorbed, sending what's not supposed to be absorbed out the poop chute, and not allowing it into the body. Okay, so schematic to show you here, you have a nice, healthy, happy gut. La la la, circulatory system is feeling good. It's nice and protected. The tight cellular junctions are doing their job. Toss a little glyphosate in that gut with some plant foods that have glyphosate on them. Voila. Gut barrier is compromised. Tight cellular junctions open up. They're not tight anymore. They're actually allowing leakage, and the circulatory system gets challenged with all these things coming in. And what is the circulatory, the immune system's like, what is that? I don't know what to do with that. It's not supposed to be here. And that's how I explain to my clients why your dog is in an autoimmune situation, because it's constantly being challenged and the immune system is being over-triggered, trying to figure out what to do with this stuff that it wasn't supposed to have to deal with in the first place, okay? And 80% of the immune system's in the gut, right behind that barrier, which has been well established as well. Going back to the wisdom, the ancient wisdom of Hippocrates, who said one of our mantras, let food be medicine, let your medicine be your food, also said, and now we know most chronic disease truly does start in the gut. And as I mentioned, all of these things in previous slides, there's the nice list, or not so nice list, of all the things that do occur when the gut is compromised. All right, I'm going to steal another phrase from Dr. Zach Bush that I really like to give people perception of what's going on, is that he specifically said, we are becoming toxic sponges, unfortunately, because when the gut barrier is challenged and we've got leaky gut, then it's allowing more toxins in. So then all kinds of stuff's coming in the body, and the kidney tubules are also being affected because they're mucosal surfaces as well, which means they're not being effective and efficient at excreting toxins. So now you're trapping all these toxins in. Okay, so you can think of, we're probably like halfway sponges, and the average American dog is like a full sponge going on here with this stuff. So then let's just do a quick review of what we've done so far. The impact of toxins on your pets, inflammation in the gut, leaky gut, allowing more toxins to come in of all kinds of stuff, depleting the numbers and diversity of the microbiome, of course, challenging the main clearance organs, the kidneys and the liver, and we know that the kidney tubules are directly impacted by glyphosate, and of course the liver and kidneys are responsible for trying to remove all that, contributing to chronic inflammation of all kinds, and that leads to everything you don't want, autoimmune disease, allergies, all that stuff. And also glyphosate is a carcinogen, so directly causing cancer. Most people are aware there's been lawsuits all over for Monsanto and that kind of thing. So it is a carcinogen, but through chronic inflammation, it's also leading to cancer from that route as well. And then specifically to move forward to our next piece of the discussion is the fact that glyphosate in the gut is altering digestion and the immune response to certain foods, or all foods, I should say, but we're going to talk about certain foods. So the other thing that I want to really, and I had a bunch of these slides in my long lecture, but just in a nutshell, glyphosate and gluten do not play well together, okay? They have been well studied to show an exponential toxicity when you have glyphosate and gluten in the same gut. Interestingly, gluten sensitivity, celiac, gluten problems did not get recognized as a big deal until the 90s. And it's like, well, why all of a sudden is gluten a big deal? And why can I go to Europe and eat bread and not feel like crud, right? Because glyphosate came out in the 70s, but it became widely used in this country in the 90s, okay? And there are still some places that don't use it as much. So now you can get the idea that now you got glyphosate at such high levels mixing with gluten, all of a sudden gluten's a problem for everybody too, okay? Just tipped it over the edge. Next thing, plant proteins, lentils, we're gonna talk about that and its relation to this whole taurine issue, depleting taurine, and what's going on with canine dilated cardiomyopathy, or DCM. So again, picture of those foods that we know are super heavy glyphosate percentages. And then the FDA came out with this blanket statement saying grain-free foods are bad for dogs and causing heart disease. And now we got veterinarians and cardiologists literally telling clients, you got to get wheat or grain in your pet's diet because it's not good for their heart if they don't eat it. And of course, we know there's no biological requirement for a dog's heart to be healthy to eat grains. Doesn't make sense. They didn't evolve that way. What's going on here? Try and shed some light on it. So I wrote an article, a couple articles, but this was just one of them to put up there for show's sake here about this. So lots of other people have written great articles. Dr. Doug's written great stuff too on the blog. So you probably all know this already. But just to briefly explain, multifactorial issue going on. I'm not saying that glyphosate is the only piece in this pie. There's definitely other things going on, but it sure is suspect to have a role in this whole scenario. Taurine is present in all animal proteins, but not in plant-based proteins. Most dogs, however, can make taurine from other amino acids in plants. Some dogs have a genetic deficit or difficulty doing so, but we know that replacing taurine for every dog does not reverse DCM, so it's not the only part of the equation. Then you have this piece of the equation, processed foods. Diets with high quality animal proteins that are not heat damaged should be fine, okay, with levels of taurine as far as this goes. And then there's more and more reports coming out that are showing that taurine bioavailability is definitely being affected by all of these things. Gut inflammation, we know, glyphosate is challenging that big time. Heavily heated foods, all processed food for pets, bacterial changes in the gut, which everybody's facing in today's world, and then high percentages of legumes do appear to be a part of this equation, and tons of glyphosate in those. Now we know a lot of these things have been found in other studies, but here's a white paper that I listed on the bottom with some very credentialed veterinary colleagues that looked at this and put all these factors out there of what looks to be involved in this whole scenario. So the glyphosate, just to review again, glyphosate toxic load for animals through HRI testing in other labs. We know that animals have much higher levels than people. Dogs, again, 32 times higher. Cats, half of that. Horses right behind dogs. And it makes sense because horses eat a lot of oats and a lot of things that are sprayed with glyphosate. They're also in the environment. They're outside. The majority probably of cats are indoors and hopefully eating less plants than dogs and horses because they are carnivores. So they're, even in the standard pet food market, they should have a little bit more meat-based protein in there than the average dog food would, and certainly than a horse would be eating. So the glyphosates that are bringing a lot of exposure into our, the ways that glyphosate is getting a lot of exposure into our animals' bodies are from, what they're consuming, but also from topical exposure. So we're going to look at that next. So biggies for what they're consuming, the diet, also treats, we're going to look at that. Tap water, which I mentioned, loaded with toxins well beyond glyphosate, but glyphosate is water soluble, so it's in there as well. But dogs, notably for our companion animals, are having very high levels of contact exposure as well. And they've done studies to show even farmers that wear gloves versus farmers that don't. Farmers that don't wear gloves, way more glyphosate in their urine. So we know that there's contact absorption. HRI did those studies too, or actually no, that was Monsanto's own study, but HRI talks about it, okay? So interesting, that was Monsanto's own study. So with dogs, we know they're rolling around in the grass, they're sniffing up stuff, all that kind of exposure in the environment. And then my dog Sage wanted to do a nice demo of doggies enjoying their environment. She is such a beautiful soul and she loves to happy dance. And she flops in the grass. After I started learning about glyphosate, I'm like, oh no, is there glyphosate in the grass? What's in the grass? But she's on all kinds of good stuff, and clearly she eats answers and a very good diet. So, but anyway, Sage wanted to do her little demo happy dance for you for a nice little picture of what dogs do. And then just to show you, there have actually been a lot of studies documenting topical exposure of pesticides and glyphosates and what it is doing to dogs in particular. And there have been studies out of veterinary universities at Purdue, at Tufts, and then also National Cancer Institute, NCI, have shown that there are links to bladder cancer. Most veterinarians, I hate to say, including me, I mean, we're seeing lots of cancers, more than we used to, but bladder cancer, A decade ago, I saw very little of it. I'm seeing so many more dogs come in with bladder cancer. And this has got to be a piece of it, and especially based on these studies. And then also lymphoma, very, very common cancer, twice as likely to develop in dogs that have had Roundup sprayed on their property 4 times a year or more. And then also exposure to lawn chemicals in another study found to elevate the risk of malignant lymphoma in dogs by more than 70%. And then similar studies for people have linked herbicide exposure, including glyphosate, to all kinds of different cancers. Okay, so this is no secret that it is carcinogenic. All right, here comes the fun news. So HRI testing, they have tested lots of different foods as well as animal urine. And we know that fresh meat-based diets and raw foods are tons cleaner, okay? And we'll talk about why. But just so you know, the average bowl of kibble tested 400 parts per billion of glyphosate. In fact, dry dog food is on the high end of all foods ever tested at HRI, okay? In contrast, 1 serving of raw meat-based diet is 1 part per billion compared to 400 parts per billion, which means your dog can eat 400 Answers meals, or actually Answers that has nothing in it. It's so clean, but the average raw meal, 400 of them, and get less glyphosate than eating 1 kibble meal, okay? However, a handful of treats, a lot of people don't think about what's in the treats if you're having plant-based treats at all, that literally a handful of treats could surpass 400 meals of a raw diet just, you know, in glyphosate in just that handful of treats. All right, so then let's talk about why are fresh meat diets, or why are meats so much cleaner, okay? These animals, these farm animals are, you know, not Answers farm animals, but the average feedlot animal is eating all of this crap. So why is their meat cleaner? Well, it's because glyphosate is primarily excreted through urine and feces, and it moves out of the body in about 7 days. Fortunately, it's not stored in the meat. They do find some that is stored in hair and, you know, skin and stuff like that, but very little of it is actually stored in muscle or meat. And so even the standard feedlot animal is not having a lot of glyphosate, you know, in their body to give to the consumer. Okay, so that is good. And studies have been done in rats and farm animals to show this. So as we all know, your dog's future is in their bowl, and that's what we're all here to talk about, is how we support health through food and similar good tools. And so of course every dog would, as soon as they hear my presentation, raw meat please. And another piece of good news, stay calm. For all of us, your dog, which of course Answers is, and for you, when you eat organic, it does make a difference. Again, organic and non-GMO are completely different statements, okay? And so eating organic does make a difference. And fortunately, HRI showed that as well. So I was able to learn that a few years ago. Really made me feel good, because you hear all those reports about, oh, don't spend your money on organic food. They just label it organic and it's not really. HRI actually did testing of lots of different foods labeled organic and found that 95 to up to 100% of the time, there were no traces of measurable glyphosate in these foods at all, okay? Up to 5% of the time, depending on the foods, there might be some measurable glyphosate in them. And they suggest that this would either be from drift from nearby farms that can sometimes, you know, make it over, commingling during transport and packaging, and maybe on, you know, some occasion fraud. But still, less than 5% of the time, if you're buying organic, you know, your food is tainted, at least with glyphosate. Okay, they weren't testing for organophosphates and other things, but you can feel good about eating organic. It should be pretty clean. Sweet potatoes, I specifically asked about because it wasn't in the chart, and that was provided to me. That is a food that is obviously in tons of pet foods and even used for treats. Fortunately, whether it's conventional or organically grown, sweet potatoes have very little glyphosate. Peas, however, just like in the, you know, oats and the owl foods, peas are in that lineup. So unless peas are labeled organic, consider them a high glyphosate food. And then just a quick note that veggies and fruits like greens and lettuces and stuff like that, they are generally not sprayed with glyphosate, but they're sprayed with a lot of other toxins. Okay, so you still want to eat organic, but glyphosate is typically not what's found in those types of foods. All right, so we're getting close to, I'm going to go a little bit over. Oh, no, I'm not. I'm doing good. Okay, so what else can we do? I always want to talk about solutions so that we can obviously help to resolve as much as we can, but also just be proactive and prevent as much as we can. So one of the best things to do beyond feeding a good diet, we talked about that, how important that is to take extra measures to protect the gut. And by eating a good diet right away, you're protecting the gut. But there's other things that we can do too. Anytime we protect the gut, which is, the gateway into from a lot of things, we're protecting the whole body. And obviously we are preventing a lot of chronic illness that way. So in steps, gut healing foods, perfect example is Answers Foods. I love to encourage people, even if they're not feeding Answers as the mainstay of the diet, get some of these supplemental foods in there, the raw dairy, the, turkey stock, fish stock, cheese, such exceptional options in this fermented food category to heal the gut and to provide, microbiome support, which is extremely important. So, but lots of different foods in this list. You could feed fermented veggies. I talk to my clients all the time about that, little bits of kraut and other veggies. And then bone broth, and the fact that, beyond fermented foods, bone broth, even with no fermented ingredients in it, is still very healing to the gut, powerful healing food for joints and brain and gut and skin, all the collagen, lots of good things going on there. And then raw dairy, even if it's not fermented, is still a very medicinal food. And as you probably are all familiar, a very complete food. And Billy talks about that all the time as well. And then, Dr. Doug does as well. So very, very good foods. And then colostrum, another healing food, and a lot of the nutrients that would be in a raw milk, but very antibody rich, very growth factor, immune regulators, and things that literally help the body's tissues to repair faster, and definitely been shown to heal leaky gut and help with leaky gut as well. And then the whole, support the microbiome. And again, Answers Foods and fermented foods is my top way of doing that. A lot of veterinarians and even holistic veterinarians talk about and still, recommend probiotics. I tell people I don't routinely recommend probiotics anymore. I like to steer people toward fermented foods. It makes more sense. One serving of fermented food is absolutely going to surpass the value of a probiotic. And then a lot of fermented foods also contain prebiotics, by the way, but that's very important in most dogs and human diets, is to get, because people aren't eating correctly, but to get prebiotics in there. Even if you're taking a probiotic, if you're not taking a prebiotic, they may not work so well. But taking the same probiotic product all the time, you're out competing the diversity that you really want to support in the gut. So, but anyway, a good thing for people to put in perspective. And there are a lot of good prebiotic options too. And mushrooms happen to be one of my fave. Mushrooms are a superfood. They do a lot. They modulate the immune system. They are also good prebiotic fibers. Okay. And then I made the mention here, probiotics, not my fave. They can have some temporary therapeutic value, but, I don't generally recommend them blanketly for consistent use. And then I do actually talk to people sometimes about the fecal transfer option to really rapidly sort of reboot the microbiome as well. So that's a fun new treatment that is being done as well. Okay, so a couple things I want to say here too is, again, supporting the body to deal better with toxins and being more proactive and preventative is feeding organ meats, and that glandulars and organ meats are so healthy. And I love to clear this up because so many clients, when I'm recommending organ meat, and of course, Dr. Doug knows when we're trained in Chinese medicine, we're all about organ meat. They're blood tonics. They're so good for you. They're in food medicine. But the average person is like, why would I feed my dog liver? Or why would I eat liver? It's dirty. It's the detoxing organ. How could that be good for you? And what I like to tell people is functional medicine concept here is that, yes, liver clears toxins. That is one of its main roles. It's got a lot of jobs in the body, and one of its main jobs is to clear toxins. But one of its jobs is not to store toxins. So the liver is very good at clearing toxins, but it doesn't hang on to them. And the place in the body that really stores toxins and hangs on to them is fat. Adipose tissue is an excellent storage unit for toxins. So they will tell you, or your dog, if you are obese or your dog is obese, very likely you are going to be more toxic than somebody that's lean. You're just hanging on to more toxins. And that's why if you have rapid weight loss, they say, drink a lot of water. You want to flush that out because adipose tissue or fat tissue is trapping that in. The liver is not. So fear not. And of course, Answer is one of the reasons I absolutely, well, there's many reasons why I love Answer's food, but I always educate people that the ratio in Answers is very different than the standard raw food on the market. There's much higher levels of organ meat, which is not only exceptionally healthy, but species appropriate for what they would be eating. Because as we know, carnivore animals, when they kill a prey, the first thing they go for is the viscera. The muscle meat comes later. Like if we have time, we'll get to that. But we're going for what we know is the most nutrient dense. They are innately going for that first, okay? And even ancestral tribal people would, you know, prioritize or really prize these organ meats. And these strong hunters that needed to remain strong would eat a lot of these organ meats even out of the field, but they would save these types of meats to bring back to the village for the most needy people, the elderly, the sick, the pregnant. So people knew, ancestral cultures knew that organ meats were very, very nutrient dense and healthy. Okay, so just want to mention that building strong organs for pets, eating organs does that. And then you have what most people think of too to help support these organs to excrete toxins better. I'm sure Dr. Keith went into this a lot. Great herbal support for liver organ, for the kidneys. And then I'm sure Dr. Christina went through some wonderful homeopathy. That's another way to really support these organs and detoxing as well. And then I'll just finish up with a couple unique products before we conclude. Ion Biome is Dr. Zach Bush's company. And this is a unique product that is derived from soil. And can, again, you know, big soil science buff. And that these are humic substances, which are basically decayed matter in the soil that were found to be able to help support a healthy, intelligent barrier in the gut. So literally helps the leaky gut to heal and protect it, okay? And it kind of zips back together like Velcro. They've got images on electron microscope and everything to show that this is occurring. So anyway, this is a great option, and it is made for humans and for pets. It goes under the name Ion Gut Health. And of course it is natural and is helping to repair glyphosate damage, but notably to keep the gut intact, which is super important for olive health and immune system. And then another product, which I actually spent a whole hour on talking about at the AHVMA this last year, is a very unique detoxifying option, which again is from the earth, from the soil. It's actually derived from a volcanic ash. So it is a clay, but it's a very specific kind of clay, and it's mineral silicate, substance, and it is very adsorbent and it attracts chemicals. Okay, so it really pulls chemicals out of the body. And the cool thing is that it pulls them out systemically, and it's been shown to pull out things like mercury and aluminum and these adjuvants that are in, that are in vaccines. So people say, what do I do for a vaccine detox? I usually like to do a homeopathic detox, but this stuff is awesome for any detox, but certainly after vaccines, removing heavy metals. It's used in animal feeds for widely in the farming industry. It's put in chicken feed and feed for pigs and cows. And it's got gut properties to help heal the gut. It's also been found to have immunomodulatory properties and anti-cancer properties. So anyways, there are some, you can get zeolites in a lot of places, but there are some supplement companies for pets that make or produce good versions of this too. And that's what I had pictured there because that's what I use. All right, so in conclusion, always want to talk about being proactive. I love to, really inspire my clients to, this is good information. Don't get, overwhelmed in that, it's very eye-opening stuff, but we always want to stay in that proactive mode. What can we do about this? And so just to rerun through that, minimize exposure for your pets. Number one thing, as we know, choosing quality. I love Answers quality. Did I say that? Species appropriate meat-based diets, okay? Avoiding these high owl foods, these high glyphosate foods. Avoid tap water, provide purified water. Avoid excessive use of chemicals all the way around, okay? So minimize flea and parasite stuff till only when absolutely needed. Minimize prescription meds. That's what Dr. Doug and, that's like myself are all about. Finding solutions that aren't prescription. and minimizing chemicals of all kinds. Okay. And then don't spray your lawns, please. Don't spray your lawns. Get with your neighborhoods, your communities, you know, make associations with people so that your parks and things like that aren't being sprayed. And then avoid excess use of chemicals for your pets with the flea products and all that kind of stuff. And then providing protection. And that's what we went into, that whole list of what can we do, protect the gut, protect the microbiome, feed the microbiome, and supporting your pet's body ability to excrete these toxins too by supporting the kidneys and the liver. And when we get to do all that, then we get to spend more time with our pets and enjoy our planet a lot more and our time with our beloveds. So thank you very much. That is my conclusion.
Wow. That was great, Dr. Katie. Thank you so much. I don't think I ever want to go outside again now.
Proactive, right?
Water.
Right.
You know what? If you want to stop sharing, then we can see each other better.
You bet. There we go.
So we got a lot of questions, as you might imagine, and a couple of them relate to water. So specifically, what's the best way to get clean water?
I mean, purified water, you know, that's a good question, actually, because that could be a big topic to talk about, because there are a lot of bottled waters that have also been shown to be still high in contaminants. So you can't trust a bottled water. As far as I know, and this is not glyphosate, but parts per billion, you can get a little water meter, which I actually have. You can get a little water meter because I have reverse osmosis in my home. And I always tell people reverse osmosis is very clean. The thing is, it strips minerals too because it's so clean. And reverse osmosis, a lot of times your water will have less than 20 parts per billion. Bottled water by regulation or law, although that's not always followed, bottled water is supposed to have less than 100. So what comes out of my faucet is less than 20, and sometimes even, depending on when the filter was changed, less than 12. But again, there's a lot of minerals being stripped out of that too. Now I take trace minerals, I give, you know, minerals to my dog, but I always tell people, if you're going to drink or give your pets RO water, reverse osmosis water, just know that it's clean, but it's fairly stripped. And so finding another purified source of water, you know, hopefully not in bottles all the time, because that's obviously not good for the planet, but, you know, spring water, all those kinds of other things. Alkaline water has been brought up a lot too, but there are a lot of people that have looked at that saying alkaline water is not necessarily the best choice for pets. So I encourage people, don't spend extra money on alkaline water, but make sure that it is clean and pure water.
Okay. You know, speaking of water, the whole thing was stripping the minerals out of the water. My thought is I'm getting a lot more minerals in the food that I'm eating than I'm getting from the water anyway. So I'm just trying to think, is there any mineral that's found in water that I wouldn't be getting from a diet?
I don't think so. So
Okay.
That's a great question. I don't know for sure, but I love your thought process, because I feel the same way, is that I'm getting so much in the types of foods that I eat, and as is my dog. And then even, you know, my great food-based supplements. So.
Okay. Right. Okay. Someone's asking, how effective is a paw wipe or rinse for removing environmental toxins after time outside?
You know, that person is brilliant for asking that. Thank you. Because again, I condensed this lecture, so I took that slide out. But they did find, in fact, HRI labs did find that removing some off pets' feet right away, they think that makes a difference. So when they come in from outside, if they're either rolling around or they, you know, in parks where you don't know if it's been sprayed, absolutely wiping the paws or rinsing the feet right away should make some dent. I mean, Dr. Bush, you had that sign behind him saying you can't wash off glyphosate, meaning, you know, so much of it is in your body. But we do think from the studies that have been done that at least some external removal can be done. So I would absolutely, you know, incorporate that in your routine.
Of course, with your dog, you'd have to wipe off the whole body.
I know, that's the thing. So I'm like, she can only go where there's no toxins. Yeah.
All right. Someone's asking about lipomas. Are they trapped toxins? Also, how to get rid of them?
Amen. I mean, you can weigh in on this too, Dr. Doug, but you know, so many of us holistic veterinarians do feel that because we know that fat and adipose tissue is such a storage unit for toxins. When I look at lipomas, I see them as little toxin storages. And when you think about it, I think it's a very brilliant mechanism by the body. The body is a brilliant innate structure, right? And it's like, oh, I don't want these toxins. I'm going to just wall them off and put them in this little lump of fat and keep it away from the rest of the body. So I do like to use, liver support, detoxifying things, but also the zeolite, the clinoptilite that I talked about, is such a great thing to remove toxins systemically. So that's another one that I think about. And essential oils, and there's other good detoxifiers, but yeah, that's kind of how I view them and how I approach them.
Okay. And you mentioned avoiding flea and tick products. Do you have, what kind of replacements do you have?
Thanks for asking. So generally I give people sort of the gamut, because different things work for different pets or different people. And of course, this can very much depend on the geographical location you're in. It always depends on the pet's immune system. So I always tell people, you are ahead of the game when you're feeding something like Answers or a quality raw food diet. Your pet should have less, they will have more resilience to parasites. They will have less parasites right there. But essential oil-based products can be very helpful. Diatomaceous earth is another really great one too. And a food grade diatomaceous earth can certainly be put in the food, and is in some supplements made for pets for parasite and daily defense and that kind of thing. And then diatomaceous earth can also be put in their hair, on them, or certainly in their bedding. And a lot of people use diatomaceous earth in gardens and outside. So it can do outdoor stuff too.
Cool. All right. We have time for one more question. And this is something you just touched on, and you got someone thinking. Any suggestions for EMF toxicity? Do the shields advertised help dogs?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So that's another big topic of mine. So I recommend a lot of things. I mean, definitely, there are a lot of energy design companies that are making these pendants and things like that to EMF protectors. That's the word I wanted. And in fact, I have one on my phone. You can see right there, on my phone. So, and I have them on I have them on my headphones. I've got them on my router. I've got them on my refrigerator. I've got them on, I don't even own a microwave, but if I had one, I'd put them on there. Literally, because everything is emitting these, and they are invisible toxins. I would say that there are definitely, I'm sure, protectors that are made that are not worth it, that are not doing much. So just know that, go with a reputable design, energy design company that you've seen some really good, like, actual research behind it, rather than just claims. And then other things that you can do, again, avoid exposure to the best of your ability. And for pets, I always tell people, don't let them lay by routers. Don't get a smart meter if at all possible. Those are bad news. They've been documenting a lot with pets and people with smart meters. They're putting out a ton of EMF. Turn your Wi-Fi off at night or when you leave the house. Your pets are exposed to that constantly. So when you're sleeping at night, and there's been tons of write-ups on how EMFs affect our brain and our melatonin and our sleep patterns. So they've documented very well that humans and pets will sleep better if you're not constantly being bombarded by those EMFs overnight too. So I have my router hooked up to a light switch. And when I go to bed, I flip off the switch and everything goes out. It's pretty cool. And then I get up in the morning, it's like, okay, turn my EMF on so I can do my thing. So yeah, so those are all good things. And, try and make your pet's bed not near, don't let your cat, cats love to lay on computers and TVs and everything. They're like, oh, they're nice and warm, and it's like, Yeah. So, all of those little tactics definitely make a difference, but I definitely would invest in some good protectors. I also have plug-in protectors that do like a huge space, like a 600 cubic foot space or whatever. And I have those plugged in my practice everywhere, and I have them plugged in my home too. So all kinds of good stuff you can do.
Very good. I was just thinking you could hook your router up to a clapper, clap on, clap off.
Love it, Doug. That's brilliant. That's our next, our $1 million idea. I love it.
Good way to end this segment, Dr.
Yes.
Kangas. Thank you so much for being part of this. And this was great information.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Coming up in a half hour, we've got Dr. Terry Sue Wright, and she's going to be talking about success stories with answers. So thanks again. We'll see you all in a half hour.